In February of 1959, 9 really experienced hikers got together and they decided to make a trek through the Ural Mountains, unknowingly setting themselves on the path of what would become one of the world's greatest mysteries. When the bodies of these hikers were found, investigators were left with more questions than answers, and decades later we are still questioning what happened to the members of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tasha and this is my series White Rabbit, where we dive into anything spooky, odd, or just interesting while I apply some special effects makeup. This week's video is going to be about the Dyatlov Pass incident and I'm going to be applying some frostbite makeup. But before we get into that, please make sure you subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any future uploads, and the like button. That. In 1959 in Russia, a group of 9 young hikers got together and they wanted to make a trek through the Ural Mountains in what was then the Soviet Union, is now Russia. The leader of this group was a 23-year-old man named Igor Dyatlov. Not only did Igor gather this whole group together, but he had done previous hikes that were very similar to this one. So the original group of hikers consisted of 8 men and 2 women. And all of these hikers were grade 2 certified hikers with ski tour experience. But after this hike, they would all be grade 3 certified hikers, and grade 3 was like the highest that you could go at the time. The best way that I could understand the grades is that they just represent the level of difficulty in the hikes. So the entire group actually got together and they mapped out this hike that they wanted to take, and they had to submit it and it had to be approved. They were all really experienced hikers, so they were more than prepared and more than capable of completing this grade 3 hike. There was even one member, the youngest member of this group, had actually done multiple grade 3 hikes. She technically didn't do the certification, but that doesn't mean that she didn't take hikes that were grade 3. The hike was around 218 miles and it should have taken them, the group estimated, about 2 weeks to complete the full hike. Igor had arranged with someone that he would send them a telegram when they got back, and this was to be no later than February 12th. Now, even though these were very experienced hikers, they were going during the roughest time of year in these mountains. Now, I did see several different timelines that slightly varied from each other, but from what I could gather, I'm going to give you the best timeline that I possibly can of what exactly happened. Also, the group did take lots of photos and they kept really extensive journals, so we did learn a lot pre-incident what they had been through and what had happened to them. On January 25th, the group arrived at what was basically the last inhabited settlement that they would go to. On January 27th, the hike actually started, but the very next day they had already lost one of their hikers. His name was Yuri Yudin. Now, Yuri actually had to turn around and go back due to some underlying health problems that he had had since he was a young child. His sciatic nerve would flare up and cause him immense pain. But normally this would be just like a passing incident. This time, not so much. It was so unbearable that he did decide he wouldn't be able to finish the hike and he had to go back. Yuri Yudin actually went back about 186 miles from where the incident happened. And it was really sad. He was talking about his final goodbye. He said it was just a shame that it was so rushed because he had to just hurry up and get back to town. It was very rushed goodbyes to his closest friends, and then one member of the group, the youngest member, actually had given him this little teddy bear that could just like fit in the palm of his hand. He actually had that with him for the remainder of his life. Now, if you remember earlier, I talked about Igor had an arrangement with someone that he would telegram them as soon as they returned, and this was to be no later than February 12th. The hiker that I told you left early, Yuri, he had actually discussed with Igor, and Igor brought it to his attention that he thought that this trek was going to take a little bit longer than they had estimated. So when the 12th came and went, there was no immediate alarm or immediate thought that something had happened to the hikers. By the 20th of February, the family was really getting concerned, and they actually demanded that someone go search for these hikers. Initially, it was just a group of teachers and students that had actually volunteered to go out and look for these hikers. They were later joined by the army and the police. It seemed like the police were a little leery to search for them. I'm not sure why. On February 26th, the hiker's tent was discovered on a slope of a mountain that the locals call Dead Mountain. Now, the tent had actually been slashed and cut from the inside out as if someone was trying to escape. All of their belongings were thrown about. Their shoes were still there. There were also footprints. And the strange thing about these footprints is the footprints looked as if they were walking away from the tent barefoot or in socks, but there was nothing to indicate from the footprints that they were running away from the tent, which is really odd seeing as how the tent had been sliced open as if they were trying to escape so quickly. Why would they get to the outside of the tent and then like gently walk? The first two hikers' bodies were found near a cedar tree by an old fire that had burned out. One was lying face up, the other one was lying face down, and they were directly next to each other. One of the hikers had on burned socks, and he did appear to be moved after death. Both of them had on multiple layers, but they were very light clothing. For example, shorts, swim trunks, 2 pairs of socks, and a long sleeve shirt. So this was very confusing to investigators because, as I told you, by the tent were all of the warm clothes. Another hiker was found about 800 meters away from that cedar tree. She was found lying on her side underneath a few centimeters of snow. Now, even though she was dressed a bit warmer than the others, she still did not have on proper shoes, just a few layers of socks. The leader's body was the next to be found. He was found on his back, his arms in position as if he were trying to rip open his vest, which was found opened. The interesting thing about Igor is that he actually seemed to have frozen in mid-motion. 480 meters from the cedar tree, another hiker was found. This hiker was found face down with his arms stretched out to his side. The remaining hikers weren't found until the snow began to melt in May. First of which was found on her knees with her face and her chest pressed into a rock. The next two hikers they found were laid chest to back in the snow. Now, these hikers were quite layered up. They had on multiple tops, multiple bottoms, and multiple socks. One of them even had a jacket on, but the jacket was found to have several cuts and gashes in the sleeves. The final hiker was found also with multiple layers of clothing on. He didn't seem to have that many bodily injuries. One strange thing about this hiker is he had gloves, but he wasn't wearing them. They were found in his pockets. So now, with all the hikers found, the investigators got to really focus in on what actually happened to them. The cause of death for the first 4 hikers that were found was hypothermia. However, these hikers had so many injuries. During the autopsy, it was mentioned several times that there were certain injuries that could not have been done by man, even if someone had a weapon. One member of the autopsy team actually said that the injuries were consistent to that of the force of a car crash. Some hikers had fractured skulls, some had broken ribs, others had both. They did need to be able to concretely say that this thing killed these hikers, so they did settle on hypothermia. However, they did not think that hypothermia was the sole cause. The next hiker that was found like a week later also was said to have died of hypothermia. He didn't have an autopsy team. It was just one individual person examining him. The last 4 hikers that were discovered were the ones that really made people start to think that something strange was going on. The hiker that was found on her knees knees with her face and her chest pressed into stone. She was actually missing both of her eyes and she was missing her tongue. She had a broken nose, she had several broken ribs, and her cause of death was internal bleeding, massive internal bleeding. One of the hikers that was actually found with her had this massive skull fracture, and his cause of death was brain bleeding. The two hikers that were found chest to back, one of them was also missing his eye, and he was found also with broken ribs, but it was described as if something had completely caved his chest in. His cause of death also was massive internal bleeding. The hiker that was found with him died of hypothermia, but they also noted this neck deformity. That's all that it said. So one of the really interesting things about these injuries is that from the outside there was no evidence. It wasn't until they were opened up on the autopsy table that, oh, every single rib is broken. Outside there was no bruising, no abrasions. It was just really confusing for the medical examiners. In all, there were 3 hikers that had massive skull injury, 5 hikers that had their chest caved in and their ribs broken, essentially. I am gonna go into theories, but before I go into theories, I do want to say that officially the government has stated that this was due to an avalanche. I do know that an avalanche would explain some things, such as why they would cut open the tent from the inside out and go running off into the mountains barely clothed. But there are so many things that does not explain, like the skull fractures, the ribs, the missing eyes, the missing tongue. Those things are not explained by avalanche. So I'm gonna go over 2 theories that I found kind of interesting. First is that the group accidentally stumbled across some type of military testing site or military operation that they weren't supposed to know about, that the government didn't want the public to know details of, so they're covering it up. And there are quite a few pieces of evidence that do give this theory some validity. Some of the hikers' clothing was found to have extremely high levels of radiation. It seemed as if the hikers had been in some type of nuclear event. Witnesses stated that night that they saw strange orbs and lights in the sky that could have been from military weapons. The area that they were traveling through was very remote, so it did make a lot of sense to think that that is a place that the military would do weapons testing. If you remember, some of the results from the autopsies stated that they had injuries that a man was not capable of giving to someone else, even with a weapon, but military grade weapons could create those type of injuries. It could also explain why the hikers would run out into the snow without protection. They could have been sleeping in their tent and heard an explosion, ran out, and maybe that is when they were exposed to all of this radiation that was on their clothing. It would also make sense that the government wouldn't want to tell the citizens that. One of the most interesting theories I came across was involving infrasound. Now, infrasound is interesting because they're sound waves essentially, but they can't be detected by the human ear, but they still can have psychological effects on a person. These sound waves can be produced by avalanche, earthquake, sometimes animal sounds, or more likely in this case, the sound of the wind kind of whipping through the mountains. Prolonged exposure of infrasound can lead to some pretty severe effects. Some of the effects of infrasound are anxiety, disorientation, hallucinations, loss of consciousness, and several psychological as well as physiological effects. If the hikers were exposed to infrasound, it's possible that they fled the tent because they were severely disoriented. Maybe they ran into the wilderness because they were just confused. Bottom line is we just don't know what happened to these hikers. It has been decades and just as many questions exist now as there always have been. But remember, these are just theories. We really don't know what happened to the hikers that day. The government ruled that this was due to an avalanche. If you have any thoughts, theories, or suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys want to hear. I hope you enjoyed my frostbitten skin look as much as I enjoyed creating it. I will be posting a tutorial on this look for those of you that are interested in recreating it. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and share.